So this is the one slide I get to reuse on all of the talks that I give. It's a little bit of an intro talk. I already got a nice intro, so I probably don't need to spend too much time here. A few things. The first one being, I've been doing data for quite a while now, so I feel like I've seen, generational shifts, and I've seen people kind of reinvent things that were already invented by previous generations of engineers. Just kind of interesting place to sit. I've also seen kind of like expansion cycles and like kind of things like going monolith and going kind of more kind of Cambrian explosion. I think we're in one of these phases, so I'll talk about that today. More recently, too, I started a company, so I decided to leave the big tech companies and go start my own thing, which has been a super fun ride. And the tiny little commercial bit of this talk is just mentioning that Preset is essentially Apache Superset managed as a service. We have a large freemium tier, so I encourage people, if you have not tried Apache Superset, well, first, what is Apache Superset? Apache Superset is a data visualization and exploration dashboarding platform, so it's very much a BI tool. I also have to wave a little bit of a bias flag saying that I'm talking about the next generation of business intelligence, and my vantage point and my position is very, very tied to the work that we've done around Superset. So as I speak about next generation, of course it's biased by the work that I've done, and the work that I've done is biased by my vision. So just wanted to be upfront on that. And then Preset. So Preset is managed, hosted Apache Superset, large free tier, pay as you go, no BS, just kind of easy to set up. BI that just works, and it's open source. So I encourage you, if you have not tried Apache Superset, I have not tried it in the past few months, to go and check it out, because we've covered a lot of grounds over the past few months. All right, so the flow of this talk. So I'm going to be talking about the story of BI, kind of how we got here. So I think it's always good when we talk about the future of something to understand where we came from. And then I'm going to talk about some of the components or ideas around this next generation. So that includes ideas like enabling analytics everywhere, the delamination of the stack, open source, what is the role of open source in next generation data platforms and around BI. The evolving role of the database, in regards to BI, as well as talking about semantic layers. I was just in a conversation with one of the attendees here, starting to get deep into what is the semantic layer, and where does it live, and how is it eroding. So it's a really interesting topic that I'll be scratching the surface of. And then I have a bucket for all the things that I'm not really talking about, but I want to mention. So let's jump into it. So first, I wanted to define business intelligence, but I hate the term personally, so I hate that my talk title is the next generation business intelligence. But at the same time, if you talk about something, I think it's such a well-established concept that I think it makes sense to anchor on it. The reason why I don't like the term is individually these words kind of trigger a gag reflex for me, just the term. I think analytics can cover and solve problems way beyond in business. And intelligence is just you think about the CIA and intelligence in that way. That's what are you using this intelligence to do? So I think maybe the first idea around the next generation is the next generation of business intelligence won't be called business intelligence. So, and what are the alternative words that people should use to talk about this is things like the data consumption layer, the data visualization, data exploration. And I think in general too, business intelligence, which is very monolithic, is just one solution that covers a lot of use cases. And I think in the modern data stack, we're breaking down things, and we should talk about the components of a BI tool as opposed to BI, which is a big loaded, too wide of a concept, and maybe ungrounded, kind of too large of an umbrella. So the brief history of BI, so I didn't want to go too deep into that, but at the same time, I think it's good to checkpoint and see where business intelligence is coming from. So if you felt like me that the term business intelligence sounds old and crusty, you were right, and then maybe you didn't know how right you were, where it goes back to 1865. So it's been quite a while since this idea or the term at least has been used. More recently, so if you think about it, like contemporary BI is probably seeded or rooted around IBM in 1858. So not new ideas. Of course, we're pretty far at that time of what business intelligence, what it came to be. But here, I wanted to go quickly and do a quick history of the different decades and what we've seen. Of course, this is super, super shallow. And that's the intention here. So in the 70s, we've seen like IBM and Siebel, they kind of identify a business opportunity here. I think it was really anchored on like competitive analytics for large businesses. In the 80s, we've seen the emergence of the data warehouse. So like early on, it's like Oracle and some databases there. And then the notion of a data warehouse was established. In the 90s, the books about data warehousing were, so we started to see the emergence of best practices. So the grandfathers of data warehousing wrote their books. So Ralph Kimball, Bill Inman wrote books about data warehouses. And we started to see vendors appear, vendors like Hyperion, who were building very specialized tooling for specialists. So super early on, specialized tooling. I think in the 2000, the next challenge that we've seen is like we really index or maybe over-index on this idea of self-service. So the promise there and the interest was to say, you're going to have a small group of people, data specialists within an organization. And typically, I've had those titles. I've been that person. So I was the data warehouse architect and the business intelligence engineer. And the role there was the general idea is to use tools to say, create your data warehouse, build it, and then build this heavy semantic layer that in theory helps people self-serve. Or at least that's the promise or the idea there, is that you would be able to build the layer so that people can come and assemble their own reports, dashboard, answer their own question. I'm not sure if, I think we kind of failed on delivering on that promise for a variety of reasons I might not get too deep into here today, but maybe we'll save that for office hours. In the 2010, so I didn't want to go too deep into that. I think like everyone here, it's close enough that you kind of know what happened. I didn't want to get into the birth and struggles and maybe ultimately death of the Hadoop elephant. But I think the big themes for 2010 are things like data going mainstream, the explosion of specialized tools, democratization of access to data, specialization of roles, right? All of us are data practitioners. And I think we've made like tons of progress in the 2000s. And now or soon, we're going to get to talk about kind of where we're at and what's ahead. All right, so some statements. So there are some things that I wanted to say that didn't really fit, into like the past or the future. So maybe that's more of the present. And those are like just statements of things that are interesting about business intelligence. So the first one is BI is kind of unique where it's trying to be kind of everything for everyone. It works for all types of data. It works for every persona. It should work for every workflow, right? And I'm not sure if it's realistic. At least like modern product building is more like you identify some personas, some use cases, and you build tools for them. But I think in BI, we've had like 2 or 3 decades of like training people of like, there's something that solves kind of everything data, and buyers and sellers have been trained to kind of expect that. Yet, even though like one tool should do it all, we see that like most companies have multiple BI tools. I think there's something that proves that a single tool probably won't work for everyone. BI, so there's people talk about no code. I don't know if there's any talks at this conference about no code, but something that's interesting is BI is the original kind of no code. So 20 years ago, we had like really fancy and advanced GUIs to build dashboards. Dashboards are essentially like simple data apps. So I think like BI maybe is ahead of its time. There's some interesting question like why is BI so naturally inclined for GUIs? I think the answer there is pretty simple. Is the fact that if you're going to build something like highly kind of layout, spatial, and visual, like it's probably best done in a GUI tool. It's hard to imagine Photoshop headless. So there's some good like kind of questions and assumptions around that. BI, another fact that's interesting about BI is that it is at the end of the analytics process chain, value chain. And this chain, as we all know here as practitioners, is a chain that's like very kind of intricate and long. So that means that BI being the last link in that chain, if there's any problems, up the stack or or down the stack or up the chain, it's well seen. So for the value proposition of BI to realize itself, it requires that kind of everything in that chain works well. So it's just it can be a tough place to be, right? You buy a BI tool and like, why is it not working? Well, there's a few links that are missing or broken in your chain. And then like an idea I bring in my talks is I think that's changing too because the work we're doing, all of us, but there's this assumption like data should be simple. It's like, I hired my first like data engineer last week. Like, why is this not all working and fixed? Where in software engineering, it's like very well accepted that you're going to need like a variety of tools and systems and services and people like different varieties of software engineering. That's super well accepted. In the data space, you're like, hey, I've got my analyst, I've got my data engineer. Like, why isn't like data solved for my company? So I think that's something collectively we need to change, and I think that's already changing quite a bit. All right, so this is where I get to start talking about the future, because this talks about the next generation, not the previous generation, and so far I haven't talked about any of the future kind of forward-thinking things. So first thing, I think like you see a lot of people talking about data apps, so I think like trying to explain this slide, the general idea with this slide is that I think we've been, like for a while, we've been like hoarding data in our data warehouse, kind of bring all the data in the warehouse, putting a BI tool on top of it, and kind of that's our little sandbox and place to do things. And I think that works for many things, but I think that fails at in-context analytics, which is the best place to consume the data and interact with data is probably within the context in which it exists and live and it's generated. So I think we're going to see like kind of interactive data visualization and analytics come out of the BI tool and be part of all of the apps and products that you use every day. So that's already happening. I think every SaaS product, every app is slowly becoming also a data app, or there's an analytics dimension. So if you think about your applicant tracking system, your CRM, all the hundreds of SaaS tools, like if you use things like Datadog or GitHub, there's like always an insights tab somewhere that's interactive. And I think like this is not as an alternative to the data hoarding and data warehousing type approach. I think there's still like tons of value in data hoarding and bringing all of your data from all your systems to your data warehouse, because data is most valuable when it's like extended and in context and enriched. But if every one of your SaaS tools and product you use every day had an interactive analytics view that was rich, then the need for hoarding and doing all that work that's expensive and brittle and hard would not be as required. So I think it's complementary. There's some ideas of that relate to the term data mesh, but not the concept. And so I'm not much of a disciple of the data mesh, story or publications we've had so far. But if you think of your data living everywhere on the cloud, I think having different kind of windows into that and having bidirectional sync, like make it easy to bring your data to your warehouse, but also to do reverse ETL. So data is kind of everywhere, and then you can have different portholes or viewpoints on top of your data. So what is to remember from this slide, I think, is is the idea of like data apps, I think, and that we need to take interactive analytics out the BI tool and bring them to the tools and products you use every day. So headless BI, so there are a lot of terms in the modern data stack that are slightly defined based on but more by marketing people than practitioners, so we have to be cautious with that, and headless BI is probably one of these terms. I probably have, first let me explain or just kind of define it from my point of view. So maybe one grounding or good way to think about this is headless Linux, right? So you can install Linux for a server without the GUI, or you can install the GUI if you want. So it's kind of, it's a head optional. So you want to use a GUI or you don't want to use a GUI. So essentially it's just software that works without a GUI as headless software. what's interesting about headless in BI? So first, I said earlier that GUIs are kind of natural and good in the data visualization dashboarding space, right? Just because it's so visual, and like the fact that it was invented 20 years ago, that we first built GUIs for that, kind of tells a story of GUIs make sense for data. But I think headless has other promises that are really good, and you'll see like Tristan at DBT Labs talk about that. I think there's just a lot of people saying like, and I'm behind that movement with like Airflow is all about pipeline as code. Like pipeline as codes are more powerful than pipeline in GUIs because when workflows or pipeline are expressed as code, they can be version, you can tie CI/CD, so continuous improvement, continuous delivery, continuous integration on top of it. So I think like the benefits that come from managing assets as code still apply in BI. And what's really the statement here that I want to try to emphasize and make is that what we need is bidirectional flows that allow to go maybe GUI first and kind of eject into code, and then get the benefits of managing like the assets you want to manage as code, or you can maybe manage things as code and eject into a GUI, and then derive the data sets and do what you do in a GUI. So we need these bidirectional flow. I think I don't think it's going to be like everyone moving to like all of a sudden like GUI BI is dead and everyone does headless BI, and that's the primary solution for everyone. It's more like some data sets that are more visible, more used, you need more rigor, things like continuous integration and continuous deployment. You would take these data sets in a certain area and manage them as code when you need. So in that regard, Superset is very much like that, where if you want to be managing your assets as code, you can do that if you want to manage them in GUI, so you have this idea of a bidirectional flow between the two. All right, enough about headless BI. All right, so that's a big trend, this one, the delamination of the stack. I hinted on that already a few times. It's this idea that BI tools, things like business object MicroStrategy, even Looker and like Tableau, they want to be monolithic. Like they want to be like, you buy a BI tool, you get all the stuff that you need. It's just like this cohesive platform that solves everything. And then what we see with the modern data stack is that we're breaking down the stack into layers that are more loosely coupled and play well together. So this is already happening quite a bit. I think I got some good slides that kind of show that visually. Maybe we over-indexed on that, and I think like that's from 2 slides from now. Like this is kind of like the stupidity of like, like all of the modern data stack and like some AI stuff in there. But you could have a team of like 10 people, work for an entire quarter to just figure out what the right stack is here. Like, be analytical, like we're gonna use this one and that one. And by the way, we are here, like we're kind of somewhere in the sea of solutions. So it's like selection paralysis, right? Like too much choice is kind of an issue. Going back to this, I hate this magic quadrant with a passion for reasons that I will explain. Hopefully you will relate to. The first thing I want to talk about. So I want to show this slide not because it's relevant, but because it's wrong and flawed in deep ways that are really interesting. So completeness of vision is the x-axis is a very important axis. They want to qualify things on complete. So that assumes that monoliths are great. Like I think what Gartner is implying is that the more to the right that you go, the better, right? But like the reality is that if you look at startup economics, the completeness of vision reversely correlates to your ability to execute. So if you have a small team focused on a specific use case, they can build something really great and really good. If you're trying to be jack of all trade, you're not going to be great at everything. So I think like the way to think about this is flawed. I think especially cast in the light of the modern data stack, where we're trying to delaminate and have like a collection of tools that are really good at a set of things and are loosely coupled and work well together. I think to me this vision for the future of having open source tooling, commercial open source companies, having like companies are really good at a handful of things, and then being able to pick and choose and glue this stuff together is a much better version of the future than the Microsoft future, where you're kind of super locked in and yeah, I don't want to even think about what that means in terms of what it means for your data team or your culture. So out of this, the good news is this is kind of super confusing and a huge mess, but order is starting to emerge from this. So this is from my great friends and deep pockets people at Andreessen Horowitz. So they did a bunch of analysis on the modern data stack, and this is one of the slides that they came up with to try to make sense of what are the swim lanes that exist, what are the different kind of cells or subcomponents in those lanes, and how do these things kind of relate to one another. And this is published. I think they published a new version of it today. I was one of the many people they interviewed to try to make sense of all this nonsense here. And I think in that world, you get to kind of pick and choose what you like, and you get to evolve, and as clear winners emerge, or as maybe it's a fit thing, for you, you're oh, I really, Airflow really works for us, or dbt really works for us, or a combination of the two really works for us, then you're still allowed to go and pick things and kind of assemble your own stack. So order emerging from this essentially loosely coupled approach to things. There's no, here, I'm not advocating that loosely coupled is always better, it's just in this case, in this era, where we started from monolith and we went all the way through an expansion phase that's really confusing to all of us. That I think this is a better version of the future. That's where we're going. At least that's the vision I'm building towards personally. So this slide is trying to look at if you really look at the core of BI, you take this fuzz ball and you start removing all the things that maybe don't really belong there. What's left in the end. So to me, at the very core of it is data exploration, visualization, assembling, collection, and visualization is the next natural steps. That's building dashboards, assembling dashboard, making them interactive. SQL seems like your kids and grandkids are probably gonna some of them are gonna learn SQL, and not as the same way that some of you might have learned COBOL and Fortran. I think SQL is here to stay. It is the lingua franca of data. It's super well established. So that means tooling that do exploration, visualization, dashboards should kind of understand SQL, or at least use it in places so that if you do speak SQL, you can do more advanced things. And then the more, I think, interesting statement here, and maybe the one that's a little bit more forward-looking, is allowing people to create interactive data apps with the building blocks of the BI tool. So if the BI tool is made out of set of components and libraries and services, I think the BI tool of the future allows you to remix and repackage these services and components to create your own data apps or data experiences. And why? So one version of the future might be, you have a BI tool, and then you have libraries to help you build data apps, and these things are disjointed and they're different. I think that exists today. I think certainly that makes sense in some ways. I think there's some really powerful thing that happens if there's kind of a link between the two, or if the BI platform in the future, if it can also be, you can use the components, the services of that platform to build other things and to remix it, you get some really good synergies there. Why, I talked already about the no code to low code to full code and bidirectional flow between the two. So that means you might be able to build something in a GUI, build a dashboard, embed it, and then eventually kind of eject it as code, use subcomponents of it, change the layout in code, and then kind of take control. So maybe at the beginning you have kind of GUI, one-size-fits-all experience, but you can grow into a more customized and integrated experience with your product. I'm not sure if I lost most of the people here, but I think it's an interesting idea, right? The question is should the BI tool be the be also the platform to build data apps, and I believe so, and that's what we're building, in the Superset community and at Preset. The future is full of open source. Well, actually, the present is full of open source. I wrote this blog post a while ago, so it looks like last year. So it's out there if you guys are interested to kind of dig deeper in this idea. But like the general idea of the blog post is looking at the data stack that we have, how much of it is open source, and then why it's open source, and do the reason why it's open source apply as you go up the stack into BI? And the answer is yes. Like it's clear, like people love open source because there's no lock-in. You're able to extend. You're able to integrate. You have the power of the community. All these things that are super valid for infrastructure also apply to business intelligence tool and tools that are more in the GUI world. Also, if the premise on the previous slide was that is the same tool that is the platform to build data apps as the tool you use for business intelligence, more traditional internal business intelligence, then that means that if you're building on top of a platform, you want that platform to be open. That's just like a premise nowadays. Like you wouldn't want to build like an IBM message queue to build your own data infrastructure. You want to use Kafka, right? Because you don't want for IBM to kind of own you. All right, I don't know I'm doing on time, so I will do a quick check to see how deep I can go in this chunk. So I'm 30 minutes in. That means I've got 10. Okay, I think that's good. So I'll be able to go like somewhat deep in the semantic layer. So first, I think I need to establish like what is the semantic layer. It's kind of a term that was more hot or more known in business intelligence in the 2000s. And so semantic layer, and trying to explain that, it's a little bit of a prism that lives in your BI tool that knows about your physical database, and it knows extra semantics that can enable people to self-serve and create their own reports, dashboard, data visualization. So it's an abstraction that enriches really your physical data structures for the purpose of self-service. So I know I said that twice, but it's a little hard to make sense of. Yeah, so the semantic layer is kind of a heavy construct, and maybe I'll go into the next slide. I feel like I had so much more to say on that before jumping to the next slide, but I think I'll get to it. So I think there's a case for a thin semantic layer. So this semantic layer exists, like there's all sorts of semantics about your data. Some of it live in your database, some of it live on your transformation layer, some of it live on the chart that you're building itself. But what's happening with a thick semantic layer, things like, and by that, like I mean things like Looker's LookML, historically business object universes, MicroStrategy projects. So for people that have maybe more gray hair like me, it will like resonate. So this semantic layer typically lives inside a BI tool. It's kind of hard to make. So you all know as practitioners that change management in data is hard, right? Like so you're evolving your pipelines, you're evolving your data structures, and you're evolving your data itself. That's challenging already as is. Change management is a huge burden and hard for data engineers. If on top of that you have some sort of like semantic layer that is like tightly coupled with the change, it just becomes really hard to keep and manage and sync this extra layer. So that means like now on top of knowing, Airflow, DBT, SQL, data set, data modeling, you also need to understand like things like LookML and the subtleties of it and how it relates to the rest of the stuff. So, you have a tower that's pretty shaky at the top. It's really heavy, or like a chain that's pretty weak with like weak links, and then you're trying to add this like extra layer of complexity on top, and it's it's a challenge to say the least. There's also the lack of a universal semantic layer. That's something I was talking about with someone just before getting into the talk. But so if you do it, if you're like, I'm going to pay the cost, I want to really enable self-service, I'm going to do that. I'm going to invest a lot in LookML. If you've chosen Looker, what happens is like when you bring in Superset or Tableau or whatever other tool, then you need to do that all over again. Because most companies use multiple BI tools, and then there's no universal semantic layer, so you need to duplicate that logic and manage it as challenging to say the least. So Personally, I'm advocating for bringing a lot of these semantics down a layer into the transform layer. That's a better place for a lot of the semantics to exist. And that means that those semantics can be shared on all the tools. I also advocate for like dataset-centric data modeling, which basically says like the interface for most of the tools and the humans using data sets to answer questions in your organization should be based on simple data sets that are easy to reason about. And then that means that a lot of semantics on like how to join the data and which metrics is related to which dimension exist inside the data set's construct. Things like metric definition should probably be coupled with the data set, not the semantic layer itself. So the question is like, not that we don't need a semantic layer, it's like where should that logic and semantics, where should they live? Yeah, I think there's maybe another thing or two I want to mention there too, is that semantic layer is like expensive to manage. And in a lot of cases, you do analytics, there's a lot of like, you're pushing the edge of discovery with your data, and the data sets are not mature, they're not settled. So it sucks to have to build the semantic layer up front and to have this rigor around labels and descriptions and like, you know, add this whole kind of layer complexity when you're just kind of playing around. So I think like the point being a progressively adoptable semantic layer is best, especially in new areas. So you have different subject area, different teams with different level of maturity of different data sets, and it's good to enable the semantic layer to grow as the team or as data sets or subject areas are becoming more covered. I think the self-service has failed at delivering on its promises. That's kind of a big statement. So if you build that semantic layer, the premise is like people can now come and self-serve. There's an interesting analogy. I'm jumping all over the place, but people have been using the restaurant analogy for the data warehouse for quite a bit. Like, I don't know if you can get a show of hands of people have heard that comparison in the past. It seems to be like not that popular of an idea, but general idea says like, oh, if the data warehouse is the restaurant, the semantic layer is the menu for the restaurant. But there's something in the modern, one thing I talked about on pushing this restaurant analogy in the past is that if the data warehouse is a restaurant, then it's becoming more of a buffet where you come in, you know, data scientists come in, data analysts, data engineers, and people are just like, I'm not gonna take the menu, I'm just gonna go and pick the data that I need and assemble my meal. There's also like people who go to raw ingredients in the back room, you know, they're like, I'm gonna take some raw ingredients, make my own thing. This is more the reality. It's a big like Costco, kind of big open market that's super messy. And the menu in that context is not that useful. Yeah, I think, you know, there's something there that's like, let's say if I drop you into a looker type interface and I'm like, okay, you can go and self-serve now, you're still like gonna be, if you're not a practitioner, you don't have the tribal knowledge, you're still gonna be like, I kind of want my analyst to be close to me while I drag and drop stuff to know whether I'm making mistakes or not. So I think it's part of the reason why semantic layers have failed delivering on their promises. So you do all this work and it's not that helpful, it's heavy, it can't be reused, you know. So the evolving role of database is one I'm kind of interested in. So one thing is like some BI vendors in the past had storage engine. You know, Tableau has extracts, so you can load your data into your BI tool. I think that's dead. You know, people invest in big data warehouses and things like Snowflake, BigQuery, or you know, accelerated tiers, things like Pinot, Druid, you know, ClickHouse, and we want the BI tool to be a thin layer over the data warehouse, right? You want to do all the heavy lifting in that big distributed in-memory cloud database. So I think we're going to see, you know, tight coupling or like BI vendors won't make databases or extracts in the future. OLAP workloads are kind of back in action. So the OLAP workloads are workload like heterogeneous workload that are analytical in nature, big scans like column store, like very good for column store and stuff like that. Database vendors are working on that. Loose coupling between the database and visualization tool, that's, like I mentioned that already. More semantics in the database itself, I think is a very interesting idea. Your labels and description, metric definition, maybe your database should be aware of that stuff. Also, semantics about transformation. If your database is aware of all of the data lineage, it can maybe figure out what is the best data set to query to answer the question that you're trying to answer. That is a feature of semantic layers called aggregate awareness. It's like, oh, there's these two data sets. One is more aggregated than the other, and if you, depending on the query you run, it wires the query to the right data, to the smaller data set. So that was like something I had from before. That's a little bit of DBT config. I don't know if who here is like writes DBT, but eventually we would love to define materialization based on database usage. I think that's something that's going to come up in the future as well. Okay, so I think this is one of my last slides. I think I'm kind of good on time here. So some things that are half-baked, some ideas that people are throwing around, talking about the future of data visualization and business intelligence that I wanted to mention. The reports that dashboards are dead are greatly ahead of their time. I think if dashboards are dying, I want a dashboard to see how much they are dying. So I think like even if it's like the analysis automation and bots and AIs doing kind of the work that we do here, replacing us, we'd still want to see a dashboard on how much the bots are doing better than us, and making sure the bots are working well. So I think like dashboards and visualization is still the human kind of data interface, and we're going to need that for as long as we're curious about understanding the natural world. Real time is kind of, there's a question like everything's going to become real time, and then all the charts are going to kind of move dynamically, and everything's real time, and batch is dead is also like not quite happening yet. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. Augmented analysis automation, I should have had like a big portion of my talk on that. That's a super interesting idea. I'm really excited about that. It's still kind of not quite there yet. So by that I mean like root cause analysis, anomaly detection, kind of automating the work of an analyst, or at least like providing tools for analysts to support their common use cases is a really interesting area that we haven't seen a lot on just yet, or at least I haven't seen it. I tried to build some of this stuff in the past. It's really difficult to build. Let's see, trustworthy, centralized, unlimited metadata. So that's the Amundsen Data Hub type thing. I think we're seeing some really good progress on that. It's really exciting. It's this idea too that the discovery part of the BI tool, finding the charts and reports and dashboard metadata that is interesting to you, is moving out of BI and into things like Data Hub, and that relieves the BI tool to really focus on visualization exploration. So that's still kind of happening and interesting. Collaborative workflows around data. So the reality is that we all collaborate on data visualization, but we all do it in Slack. I don't know if that's what you're experiencing too, but people take screenshots of whatever dashboard and then go in Slack, like, check this out, like, send me the link. I'm gonna, save a copy of your thing and then show you my version of it. So maybe that's okay. That collaboration are not taking place in tools and into Slack. So, but I think we have yet to see really good integrations there and really good way to annotate and then see each other's kind of insight, label the data and say like, oh, this dip is from this tsunami that happened, on that date. Yes, so the last one is the opening statement, and the problem I'm really interested into, and the people at Preset are working on, and something that's like really in our day and age, and like as I'm talking to a group of people who work closely with data, I think we all want to go and build like data experiences and data apps, and I think we have yet to see like a full comprehensive platform of all the dream components and tools and libraries and services that we need to enable us to go and build awesome data app and experiences. So really interested in this one. Like next time I'll give a talk, it will be to show kind of progress that we've made in those areas. And with that, last statement is one that I kind of open with, which is if you haven't checked out Apache Superset in a while, check it out. Like we've done so much work as a community to bring it where it's at today. Just in the past 6 months, it has gotten so much more beautiful and better, and more like kind of usability has gone up quite a bit. So I encourage you to check it out, and the best way to check it out is on Preset. There's a free tier, so you can kind of play with it and see what you think. And with that, that's all, folks.